Hello, welcome back. This is Andrew. We're continuing with our Unreal Engine remake of Mega-lo-Mania. So yesterday I did some work on the map, as we see here, or what we've called the map, mostly because it was generally just cropping and resizing the sprites that we had already started on Wednesday. But we sorry I got all of the sprites done, and I applied them to our slab, as the game called it, and I'll just demonstrate kind of what I put together. Moment. Just make sure that's working. Should be working. Okay. I'll demonstrate what I put together. I just press play, so we can see we've got the full map. We've got a bit of coast on the top, a bit of coast on the right, the bottom, and the left. So this is just iterating through all the different land types, confirming that all the bits and pieces, all these features, are in the right place. There is 16 different combinations with various. Some of them have space on 2 sides, 3 sides, or no sides, as is this case. Now, as I say, most of that was really, or most of the time to achieve that was taken in trying to get the sprites. So we have put them in this map sprites directory, and map's kind of the wrong word for it. The game refers to the level as an island, and each individual part of that island is commonly known as a sector. So we'll do some renaming shortly, and some of the names that I've created do reflect that. So the main thing that I did was not use the enumeration. I started with it, as is evident, and I started with that on the Wednesday stream as well. But one thing that I found was that while the enumerations would define all of the different combinations, I suppose, of how that sector is meant to be displayed, it didn't really help with describing it to the engine as a whole. So we could define a sector or create a sector with a given enumeration value, for example our top right bottom left, as we've called it, and I'll explain the naming conventions that I've used in a moment. But I could create that sector with that enumeration value, but it wouldn't really tell me what that meant. And while the sector itself needs to know it for display purposes, the game needs to know it for how, if it were to create random levels, or to know perhaps even how one particular piece of land does or doesn't connect to another by following the appropriate connections. So if we take even what we've got here, the game needs to know that this particular island has no direct connections for various gameplay elements that we'll go into much later on. But obviously that's a limitation of the enumeration. We only have a value and a description, and the description is purely for our own benefit. So I instead decided to go with a data table, and that's populated with our simple sector structure. Now a simple sector structure literally just has, at the moment, 4 Boolean values for whether the top, the right, the bottom, or the left hand side should be accessible, whether that should connect to another sector. So they're Boolean values, and when they're false we get the coast, and when they're true we don't get the coast. So then I populated the data table with all 16 variations. We have an island, which is just a nice the island, which is just a nice way of saying something that, like the picture here is, is completely blocked off from all directions. And then we have on the other end of the scale our top, right, bottom, left, which is true for each part. For some reason our island is not actually true for each part. Maybe that one's not working correctly, but the top, right, bottom, left is true for every part, and that basically means that all of those sides are accessible. Now, the benefit of laying out this particular table is that we can use the Boolean values to simply apply the logic to our currently map blueprint. So if we load that up, put it somewhere we can see it, this logic here, I'll cover it in more detail in a moment, hides and shows all of the different features. So if we go to the viewport and put that to the front, I think is the right way we want to go. Yeah, the front. Zoom in so we can actually see it. So by default, within the editor, all of the features are in their appropriate place. And because of the corner features, because of the corner features and the fact that they're slightly in front of everything else, we get the island look. But from that, we can take, and I've named some of them. So the corner pieces I've named as the appropriate corner, just so they're clear. But the ones within each side, I haven't named. So if we highlight 1, 8, and 13, you can see that those three pieces represent the right-hand side. And because I've grouped them into their appropriate sections, I haven't individually named each property, each feature within this blueprint. And from that, we have a function called render map, which is what we briefly saw earlier. And with that, we simply take a name property, and the name properties are the kind of index values for our data table. It's these values down here. Typically in a database kind of scenario, these would be the index. For one reason or another, Unreal has named this column effectively the name. It's not necessarily what you would display as a name, but it's the name, and they've got an associated data type called name that goes with that. It's said that if you look at the help for a particular name, so we can go over here, hover over name and press Control and Alt, and hold it. It basically says that it's a piece of text used to identify something, and it's much faster to compare than two strings. So it's almost like having a string, but it's better performance when comparing them. But more importantly, that's the kind of index row for our data table. That's how we have to reference things. So the render map gets our map name passed into it, and we use the get data table row selectors to find from this, get data table row sectors, and that end part is actually the name of the data table we've selected. So we're using that data table we've created, we're passing in that name. Now if the row is found, we move on, and we follow. This just follows from left to right, and then from left to right, so it flows round. And we take all of the Boolean values that we have, and we've tied them all up to the appropriate places. So here, we start with the sides. Here we are referring to or referencing the top side. Now we say in our data table it has a Boolean value for whether the top should or should not be shown, and that simply sets the visibility of that top paper group, as it was, the paper grouped sprite component, and it sets the visibility of that and its children. And we apply that to the top, the right, the bottom and the left using the values from our data table. And that makes hiding or showing each individual side really simple. And we loop round just to keep the blueprint on one page effectively. We've looped round, and we do exactly the same method with the corners, except for the corners you just simply need to know whether two sides, the appropriate two sides, are to be shown or not to be shown. So here we're talking about the top right corner, and we're setting the visibility based on two values, and we've used this Boolean and logic component node to determine that. And that basically takes two Boolean values, and we can see that they're, if we highlight over that one, I think, yep, it's the top and the right, which obviously map very clearly to our name of our corner, and we AND them together. So if both of them, and only if both of them are true, do we come out of this node with a true value, which sets the visibility to that corner. And again, that's repeated for all of the four corners. Propagate children is selected simply because I copied and pasted it from one to another. The corners don't have children, so that's not relevant. And we've put in the event graph basically just the, I guess, the animation, for want of a better name, that I displayed or showed when running the game, to kind of iterate through all the various options. That's purely there to demonstrate that each of the properties are correct. So more importantly, we've set within the construction script, and we don't run this normally because it kind of overlaps with the animation part of it, but this is what typically would be used when a map, as we've still got them called, would be constructed. It would simply know what the map type is, or somehow be told of exactly how, I don't know yet, but be told what the map type is and call the render function. So we've set this map type property. This map index is actually obsolete based on attempts I was going to do. Oh no, sorry, that's used by the animation. So the map type is the current map type for this sector, or this map as we've called it. We can change the default value by typing the name, and that's one of the negatives with using the data table, is that you can't simply select one of the values because they're just names, which, as we've discussed, are simply strings. You have to explicitly type it in, which does give some margin of error, particularly with some of the longer names, but at the moment it's working, so we're kind of run with it until such point as there is a definite blocking point. So we're currently passing in top, right, bottom, left. So if we just demonstrate that, if we can connect the construction script with the render map. Now the construction script part is actually executed within the editor, so we should be able to see that, and we'll just break that one and take a simpler one. It hasn't seemed to work reliably when I was working on my own, so in this case it's worked. If we do bottom, it works again. We'll do top. So again, I've worked clockwise and tried to be consistent in that. I think I have so far. So it's always clockwise on which side you want to be shown. So if we want all of them to be shown, it would be top, right, bottom, and left. Now if we want just the bottom and the, well actually let's say just the bottom to start with, and then if we wanted the left hand side, it would actually be bottom left. Oh, replaced it then. Bottom left. And if we wanted the right, it would be right bottom. And as I say, that's because everything works clockwise. The first one we want shown should be the one that we type first. Now the names of them, based on this, probably actually put it backwards if I'm just reading this correctly. The top says true for top, false for bottom, right and left, but when we had the top, get back to the construction script, we can actually do it in here, put top back in, the true is actually the place where we're actually blocking. So some of the logic is a bit back to front based on what I've explained, what I was aiming for. I did complete this quite late on Thursday, so it's not surprising that the logic's slightly weird. It would make more sense for the Boolean value of true, and as I did try and describe, except until we got here and I realised that this one was obviously wrong, but it would make more sense if the true value actually meant that you could pass through, and therefore top, right, bottom, left should actually have no particular blocking points. An island should have all of them. So if we made the island have all the blocking points, close the row there, and save that, jump back over here, select our map type and do island, we now get completely empty, and that's because I put the logic the wrong way round. We can, because of the way that this is all put together, it should actually be very straightforward to fix that, because all we need to do is reverse that Boolean value. So we should be able to have a Boolean not, and the tricky part is reconnecting up all of the little lines that we have to make sure that I don't break ones that are already tied, but it does look like I can drop that over the line that exists. Let's see if that actually works, because it did highlight it a second ago. Maybe it was just highlighting it. Yeah, it doesn't look like there is any easy way to tie this up apart from literally reconnect it. But we can connect the top row to the knot, and then we can connect the top to the ones that need to be top. And nicely enough, we know that each one of these is only connected to one of the row values, and each one of these, or only two of these, are connected to the top as well. And again, because of the way the words work, we know that it's going to be and again, I've always done it kind of clockwise, so I've pinned the top pin to the top pin, and then the right pin to the bottom pin. And again, in this case, it's always, hopefully, not quite, yeah, maybe I wasn't consistent in that case, but nonetheless, we know that this pin needs to replace anything that points to the top. So we can see there that the top goes to the top pins of the first and the last item. So we'll just grab that to there and that to there. So the top section should now be reversed. So if we go back to our viewpoint, we can see that it's come back. But then if we, because we know the logic's not right for any of the others, if we then decide we want to do the top, that's not actually what we expect. Well, the top isn't showing, that's correct, but all the rest should be. So we need to tie up all those not values to make this work. Keep them organized. So we'll start with just tying up each of the values from the table. And again, we know definitely in this case it's top right, bottom left, so we know this one's now representing the right. So you can connect it over there, and over there, and over there. And with that alone, we'll be able to see that our sides come into play. Now there's a little artifact on the bottom left and on the bottom right. That's because our corner piece isn't actually being displayed over the joining of the bottom, the bottom and the left and right sides. That's straightforward to fix again. We can take our right hand side and we can see that it actually connects to the bottom two of the first two corners, so we can quickly drop that in place. And we'll just do the rest now because I think it's fairly obvious where we're going with this. The bottom is connected to this not value and connected to the top 2 points of the second 2 items, so we can connect that up. And finally the left is already connected to the knot and then to the bottom of the last 2 again, so we'll connect that up. And we can perhaps, now we've got these 4 things, if we space them out a little bit more, might give us a bit of a clearer picture of where things are going. But there's quite a lot of lines stemming from there, so maybe it doesn't. But nonetheless, we can now go to our viewpoint and we can see that the corner aspects are fixed. This actually now correctly represents what the intent was. The value is top because we can go to the top or through the top, or we're connected to the top. And if we say bottom, we're actually connectable to the bottom. Now, there was one feature, or kind of the image parts of this, that I didn't actually know what it was for until I think it just occurred to me what it was for. Now within the sprites for this we have this feature 3, and we'll just drop the map over there so we can drop the feature in, put the map back, and the feature 3's dropped over there. Now I think it goes here because we can see that these two side pieces leave this little space, which looks a bit awkward. I think maybe if it was done on a I don't know if that actually makes it better or not. I guess it makes it a little bit better. Position it right. See how that works. No, we're leaking over a bit at the top, but maybe that is actually where it's meant to go. But that said, it may work well when we've got this grey background. But if we go back to the actual game, because it's black anyway, it's not going to make any difference. I'm fairly certain that the real game doesn't leak over like that. I think we'll just jump into our island of choice. It's got to get 30 people. There we go. Not that that ever matters because we always end up losing. But I'll have to look to try and figure out why if we go to this one. Oh no, it actually it does. But that you can see right at the bottom. Back to the front. Right at the bottom here, you can actually see that the star, this bottom star, actually stops just a little bit away from the end of the land. So they do have that black feature in there just to stop the stars actually touching the land. It gives the land a little bit of shadow. So we will probably put that back and tie that up correctly. Now, as we've said before, the features and the slab for this particular version of the game is much better quality than the slab and the features that I have. The blue starry effect around the side looks quite good, whereas mine just looks like pixelized spray. So at some point we'll try and figure out how to sort that out. But for the time being, we now have the sector, as it's going to be called, working as we'd like, and we can use that now to create our minimap. That's going to be our next task. We are going to, however, just rename things. This is actually not our map, but our sector. We're going to remove the map type enumeration because we're currently not using it anyway. We're going to rename our blueprint. We can't call it sector because the other thing is. This structure is probably nicer to be named sector because it really represents an individual sector, but equally so does the blueprint. This blueprint is the thing we're going to create many of during the process of the game, so we'll see how that goes. Sectors is fine, sprites is fine. We'll just give that our sprites color, and all the sprites are in there. So from the map to the so we've actually got, this is all within a level that we created before. We've called that level game. But the game has an instance of our map. Shouldn't actually be called map anymore. Yeah, so we were going to put the map sprites in the sprites directory, but it does seem a bit pointless to have a sprites directory with everything in it, and then a sector directory with just a blueprint and stuff. It kind of works to have the sprites within the actual sector, and we'll probably apply that to the other parts as well. But we don't need that directory. Not quite sure what reference that was. Yeah, so the blueprint's correctly named here, but it's not. I guess this is its instance name, so it's not. It's not reflected there, but we've easily renamed it, and now it is reflecting that correctly. And what we're going to do is just jump back into our sector blueprint. So we've got windows over. and we are gonna leave the event begin play part separate from the rest of the code. So we haven't actually covered this, so we'll quickly cover it. When the begin play happens, which is when they start, or when this particular component or blueprint is instanced, we call our render map function with the current map. So that will default it to whatever happens to be the default version. And this again is all for kind of demonstration purposes. It's not really how the main game would work. From there it sets a timer by event, and we've used those when we were dealing with our little sprite animation. And that triggers an event that will occur every 2 seconds, and it loops. And then it jumps down to the get data to table row names. And that's the process of rendering the map. So from that, we get data table row name. We get all of the row names from the data table. Jump back over to our data table. You will get all of these as an array of names. And then from that, so it's evident, obviously, as I'm speaking, that parts of this weren't actually necessary for other parts of it, but the key point is this part. Every time the event occurs, we increment the map index, which starts at 0, by 1, and we set it onto the variable so that we can remember where we were for the next event. We get the data table row names, and we use that map index to get one of them, effectively the next one, every time this event occurs. And then from that we get the name, and we pass that into our render map. And that's basically how I iterated over each of the different map combinations or sector combinations. Again, I do need to continue to rename some of these things. But what's more important is when the map is constructed and what that map type is. So we haven't quite ironed out what's going to happen when we instance one of these within an actual game, but we know that we've got this map type, and this map type is used. As I say, we're going to work on the mini-map now, so we're going to create a new folder, add new folder, I'm just going to call it mini-map, and the mini-map is this bit up here in the top left. It shows the island that you're on effectively and has the sectors that are available. And as a player, you can view any sector regardless of its location, whether you own it or not. But obviously, if you don't own it, you don't see any information on the right hand pane for the menu, whereas you do when you own it. The mini-map's made up of a grid of, I believe, maximum is 4 by 4. So there are a few islands within the game that are 4 by 4, but most of them are some combination pattern, and obviously we're going to have to define all those patterns within our game moving forwards. But for now, we want two things. We want the sprites and we want a blueprint. So we just jump over to our texture, and the mini-map sprites are actually in a different file, so we can drop down to the desktop. We've got it here, small map PNG, so they are. And again, I think the quality of them doesn't quite appear to be the same as the quality for some of the other images we have. Scrolled too far over, now it's all slow. Let's close that, reopen it, so we're on the same one. So the quality is not too bad actually. I think that maybe they're okay, but nonetheless, this is what we're working with for the time being. We'll work on potential improvements to the sprites as time permits later on, and if they become available. So this is the sprites, and nicely enough, these sprites are in a grid, so that should make it fairly easy. I say that, but we never really know. We'll drag the sprites into our textures directory, and we will click the change the texture group to 2D again. That gets rid of the blurring effect that we have, and we'll add the chroma color to make it transparent, and then we will extract the sprites. Back over here, right click, sprite actions, extract sprites. Now, as I say, in this case we know that they look fairly uniform. Hopefully a grid based extraction will work. That's going to save us a lot of time. So we'll turn it to a grid, and we'll say there's 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 items. So we want number of cells across is 10. A number of cells down is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for that lonely little one at the bottom, and 7. And then we'll just reduce this number until we get the amount of columns we want. So if we have 16, it's clearly too small, but we can see that actually they are about 16 width. There's just padding and spacing, but luckily we can account for that. So we can account for a margin. A margin basically is going to be any space on the top and on the left. There doesn't appear, although perhaps is 1 pixel. No, so there is no margin on the top, but based on this, sorry, there is no margin on the right either, because some of them are slightly bigger. So because of the fact that some of them have the coastal areas, ones that don't, like for example this one at the corner, or even this one here that is completely clear on all sides, is going to have some of the transparency around its side. So we know that it's a bit bigger than 16, probably about 20, so we need to make it even. Another 2 more, 22. So let's go down. Yep, so that fits all of them. But it doesn't fit well with the one to start, and that's where the spacing comes in. So we know that the end of the first tile is at 22, but the beginning of the next tile, for some reason, is not immediately afterwards. There's some spacing, as they've called it, in the middle. But luckily we can account for that. I just put in 10. 10 happens to be correct. But now you can see that one column is here and one column is there, and in between is 10 pixels of nothing. So if we zoom out, we can actually see that all of our columns are correctly accounted for. And we simply just need to reapply that same logic to our vertical, the Y direction. But it doesn't look like there's actually any padding. If we look at these two, for example, both of which have coast, the coasts are touching. So there's no padding on the height, but they are, again, 22 pixels wide. So again, we zoom out, we can see that we've got our 10 columns and our 7 rows. Yep, that's correct, columns, rows. And everything is within them. That looks really good. They're all caught. Now, we've extracted them, we have all the sprites. We'll create a new folder. Appear that you can create an, oh, there we go. Sprites. Make that blue. Back over to the texture, and we know all of these sprites that we have here go in that directory. And we have forget to do the move part. When you drag something around, it wants to know whether you want to copy it or move, and it always asks. There probably is keyboard shortcuts you can tell it to do one or the other, but I always forget to make that choice once they've moved over. We do end up with 9 items, again because we had 10 rows and we had 1 on the last one, 10 empty ones. We can just delete those. We definitely don't need them. So now we've got all our sprites. Now, one thing that some people may have noticed with this particular set of sprites, this texture as we've imported it, is that various different islands have different available shapes, and not any one, I suppose, different styles. Not one style has all of the available items, all of the available directions, parts, pieces, whatever you want to call them. The white one happens to have the most, I think, almost, maybe equal with the brown, but the dark green one here has quite few, and the light green one here actually only has 6 variations. That's but obviously because the only ones that are included are the ones that actually are used within the 10 epochs of the game. Now that's not too much of a problem if all we ever want to do is create the 10 levels that are available in the actual game. If we wanted to expand on that though, and perhaps, as I kind of briefly suggested earlier, make some type of random generation, then we would have to come up with a way of creating new styles or creating more of these. Now some of them are just the same thing, just with a different colour applied. You can see if I can pick one out. Yeah, perhaps this green one here, second row, third in, is, in terms of the coast, identical to this orange one here, first row, about the centre. And that would apply to quite a few. But there does seem to be some variation. Or maybe that's not true, actually, I was looking at different ones. So anywhere where the coast is the same as another piece, it does appear that the centre part is simply just textured differently. Now perhaps later on in the process we can somehow texture these ourselves, or texture the kind of key part, and make an unlimited amount of variation. But that's something we can do once we've got the basics done, and we're building up kind of additional features within the game. For now, we can use each of these parts within our game. Now each of these parts obviously have a different amount of open areas, so they would relate to the sectors that we previously had before. I keep scrolling instead of zooming. So we would call this one here, that has coast all the way around an island, and we would call this one our top, right, bottom, left piece. So we can apply that same understanding to all of these pieces moving forwards. Now, our mini-map blueprint is simply going to be, again, I think we'll just confirm, our sector blueprint is an actor. So we'll have our mini-map blueprint be an actor as well. And we'll just call this the mini-map. We'll call it... No, we'll stick with mini-map. And we'll drop our mini-map. Well, that's a camera getting in the way. About approximately where it needs to be within our game. We set this to be front and lit, so we get kind of the same perspective. Put that about where we want it, and we'll just press play so we get the proper camera. You can see that the ball that represents our mini-map is kind of in the way. Shouldn't actually be the case. Let's see where we are. Camera doesn't stand out very well. I don't really know why it's not white, but our ball is clearly not in the right place. It's kind of behind everything. Let's try and get this in the right place. It's still not showing up on our camera. It's not, I guess it's not showing up on the camera because it's not actually, oh, that's quite handy, didn't know we could do that. So there's a little pin icon down here, and we can click that and it will leave this kind of picture in picture open, so we know what the camera's looking at. So once we've actually got something rendering in our mini-map, it should appear here. So we'll jump straight into the mini-map in our default scene route. Now ideally we want the mini-map, let's save some stuff. We want the mini-map to be dynamic again. We want it to show the mini-map as per the level defines. we're going to just quickly just drop in enough pieces to create the first map we keep playing on, these two cells together. But we'll also put the pieces in place so that the grid is there and we can position things that we want. Now, I think we've got kind of multiple ways we can do this. Well, I guess that applies to everything actually. So we could just drop the pieces in. If we move our mini-map over here so we can access it in the same space, we can jump to the sprites. We know that it's these two items. We can drop them in over here. Just need to find them now, wherever they happen to have gone. Maybe they're there. Yep, in there. So we just need to make that billboard small again. I think we actually do that from outside of the minimap. Over here. Like that. Where is that option again? Details. Oh, yeah, that's on the wrong one. And edit the billboard scale. Drop that down to 0. It's as small as it gets. Okay, so now if we go back to our minimap, not our texture, we can close that. Our minimap over here. We still have that awkward ball in the way. I think we have that awkward ball in the sector blueprint as well. If we go back to the blueprint, yeah. So one way or another, we'll have to figure out how to get rid of that. But for the time being, we'll set. We're at the front. Move them forward a bit. That seems to put them in front of the ball. Move that over there. So what I did with to try and get all the sector features in the right place, I set it to snap to a grid of 1, and we need that kind of same behavior here, so we can see all our numbers are staying quite static. Well, sorry, they're precision point rounded to the nearest 1, and that allows us to basically just align these two things up perfectly. So I think they're about in the centre. I think that one could go. So 0's in the middle. We know that they're, it was 22 high. So we really want to kind of put this at 11, so it's about in the middle. And we'll put that one 11 2. That gives us that space that we had when we were extracting them. So we just bring that in 3, that in 3, and then that in 4. It kind of makes it in the middle, but we don't actually have really any grid here to work with. We just have 2 sprites in the middle, about where we want them to. So that's not going to work very well long term, but we'll see what that looks like in our, glimpse it there. See what it looks like in our game if we press play. We have the minimap. It's obviously not positioned ideally, but we'll have to position it better once we've got an idea of how big it's going to be if all the pieces were in. So we can do that as the next one. Now we know that this particular layout does represent the first island of the game, and there's many islands that use this brown texture, but we don't want to code our minimap blueprint to simply know about those individual combinations. That would obviously be the quickest approach, be a bit time consuming to kind of drop them all in, but not only does the minimap need to be able to show them, which we would achieve by drawing them effectively by hand, but it needs to understand what they are. It needs to understand how the user can interact with them, and to achieve that best, it would be better if the minimap generated them itself. But also to do that, it would be better if it knew where things were meant to go, because we've kind of just placed this one at 2, 5 and 8, and this one happens to sit next to it at 2, 5 and 8, minus 8 in this case and plus 8 in this case. But how to actually get them in a 4x4 grid is the bit that I'm not necessarily certain of. We can create a UI grid if this was a UI element, which it's not, but perhaps it should be. So let's leave this one as is, and we'll jump back into our game and we'll create something to do with the UI in the minimap, user interface, widget blueprint, and we'll call that the minimap widget, and we'll drop that. I guess we won't drop that in. Why? I don't know why we can't drop it in, but we'll get to why we can't drop it in a moment. The minimap, the UI widget can have a grid panel, or better still, a uniform grid panel. We can drop that into our space, and then we can make that fill. So we're working on a widget now. Let's kind of cover what we've got. That widget should at some point be able to drop into our screen. We'll figure out why that can't just drop in a moment, but we'll work with it within this editor space for now. So a UI widget can have a lot of common UI components. You can have things like forms, text boxes, spin boxes, combo boxes. You can have other things like images, buttons, sliders, etc., etc. All kind of UI things that would be necessary. Probably not everything that you could think of or everything that you would need in kind of more diverse games, but at least everything that we're going to need for this game, I'm fairly confident of. Now, the general way to organize a UI widget is by using these panels, of which there's a number of them, particularly for layout purposes. So perhaps there's a few panels that aren't necessarily for layout, but most of them are for layout. So we have a canvas panel, and then you have grids, horizontal boxes, scroll boxes for more dynamic things, uniform grid panel, vertical boxes, and wrap boxes. And each of the items have, maybe some of them have a kind of like a little helpful hint to say kind of what's normally a good use case for those particular things. Like the horizontal box has many children and it flows horizontally, whereas the vertical box has many children and flows vertically. Now we've dropped in a grid panel, a uniform grid panel, and we know that we want it to be positioned start at the top left, and we also know that it actually wants to be 4 pieces wide based on our sprites. Again, if we jump back over to our sprites, we can see that our actual sprites are 22 by 22, but remember we've got some of them have that border space on them, so that might become a bit awkward because this island space actually, if we edit the source region, zoom into any one of these, we can see that while this particular item is 22 by 22, there's a lot of transparent space. Now, potentially that's going to cause us a problem in the uniform grid panel, because every part of it is going to want to be 22 by 22, which actually means our individual images will not connect. So to get the images in there, we need to use the image, and we can drop, well, inevitably we're going to have 4, and then we'll drop another 4 for our second row. We'll position our island, this island, just at the top corner for the time being. So we want to make the uniform grid fill our panel, our parent, which we use our anchor, and the anchor can be used to position this at various points, but we'll just fill it. We want it to be everything. And then in there, we don't want any offsets at the moment. offset right basically tells it how far to be over, and what we've actually done here is, because it had an offset right and bottom, that because we've told it to anchor to the whole component, it's added that offset and pushed it away from the edges of the parent. So to get it to fill our entire space, we just simply need to set it to 0. So within there we've got a number of images, and again we want our images to display our individual map components that we've had. So we open up the brush and we select the image, and we can select our sprite. So we're actually going to take, well, I think just for the time being we'll just pick any old map component. Don't think we named them anything good, did we? Small map is what they've got, so we'll see if we can use small map to help search here. Small, yeah, there we go. So we'll just pick the first sprite of each of them, and we'll do that for all of them. Small map sprite 0. See if we can, yeah, just copy that name so we can quickly apply it to all of these. So obviously they're going to be wrong for an actual map that we're aiming for, but hopefully we'll be able to use this as a guide to see if this process is actually going to work. Because I'm concerned that because the individual pieces have padding, they're very small, because the individual pieces have padding, they're not going to connect up. So our canvas panel, our parent object, is quite big. It doesn't actually seem to have any specific size things, despite the fact you can resize it. But the panel is going to be relevant to kind of UIs, and what we're actually doing here is creating a small part of the UI, and we're actually going to be doing it at a maximum of 4x4. So with our 22 pixel wide sprite, it's actually only going to be 4 times 22. So about 88 pixels, which is really small in terms of how this was originally set up. So we try and get that to about 88. There we go, 88 by 88. Now our actual image, let's push these over, don't appear to be, despite the fact that our uniform grid is meant to make things uniform and gritty. We definitely have some, oh, they're all at row column 0, and that's column 1. So it doesn't really matter which one's which, so we'll just make that row 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 1, 1 and 2. Okay, so the grid, the uniform grid doesn't seem to explicitly say how many rows and columns it has. There may be a way to define that, but I'm not sure. That's not too much of a problem. Once we've got everything in place, it shouldn't make any difference anyway. So that image is row 0, 0. That's should keep the row the same. Row 0, column 1, row 0, column 2, row 0, column 3. So they're still really, really spaced out, aren't they? Despite the fact that this should be 88 by 88 and that should be 22 by 22. We still seem to have this massive amount of space between each individual column. And it's particularly awkward having to define the individual rows and columns. One, 2, 3, 4, 1. Where's that one? Oh, we put him down there. So he can be row 1, column 0. Nope, can't copy and paste. So we need another 4, 8, 9 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we'll do as it does row 0, number 1, row 0, number 1, 0, 2. So just name all of our pieces. It's a bit of a tedious task if this bit isn't going to work. We'll keep going. So since we started at 1, actually that's 1, 0 instead. 1, 1. We want to do that. Do this one instead. There we go. 1, 2. 1, 3. 4. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, keep doing that, 30, 31, 32, thought I copied 9 in, but evidently not. 33, 40, 41, 42, and finally our 43rd, which actually represents row 3, no, sorry, row 4, column 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, and move again. For some reason I can't seem to remember that we start at 0. Anyway, we'll put these all where they belong. So that's 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. Don't need you. That's where we've gone wrong. Kept counting 4 for some reason. 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3. So all of these 4s we don't need. Now what we'll do is we'll actually use the green sprite. If we jump back over here, this forest green sprite I think is the one we want to use. No, actually, this forest, the dark green sprite. So sprite 43 to 51. So we should be able to just type 43 in because we don't have that many. So it's 43, 44. Forgot where it was. 45 and 46. Still 44. Nice. 45. So we're just outlining with this particular one because this one I know is basically just the 4x4 block. So I know that all of these sprites will be the one we want. I think that's the one, yeah. 46. No, not 46. 47. 47 as well. 47. 47. That one will be 48. Not quite. That one will be 48. That one will be 49. 49. That's better. 50. 50 again. 51. And 46. Ooh, 46. There we go. So we've now got all of our pieces in, and we can see that the green border actually overlaps, or not overlaps, doesn't quite touch the sides. Now unfortunately, because of the way that this grid's going to work, it's actually going to place each of those parts with the gap. So this isn't going to work. Even if for some reason we actually tightened it up, I don't really understand how each of the individual images can be 22. The panel says it's 88, and yet it doesn't fit, unless it's something to do with the DPI scale. Don't really know what that's all about. That scale didn't actually affect anything. Yeah, it must be something to do with the scaling. But I don't know how that affects things at this in this time. But basically this isn't going to work in a grid. We're going to have to simply just place all of our images where we want them. But we can just select them all, drop them out of the grid, delete the grid. I think it's just plopped them all on top of each other. It's a bit annoying. So we do have to then calculate each of the different positions, type them all in, get all the images in the right place. But they're just multiples of 22, minus 4, I think, depending on the exact version of them. That's still not going to work, is it? Because, again, if we position our 16, something like that, our images in where we think they'll go, individual images have the Unreal Engine. I'd watch it. I'm not quite sure what you mean there. Partly atomic. Is it going to do something strange? Yeah, so we have all of our pieces at some really wacky stretched version. Again, something, I don't know, to do with the scale or whatever. I think if we shrink that down, does that make any difference at all? No. I think it's basically because the size has just gone crazy, so we'll have to resize them all. I think we can do, yeah, so the image size says that it's fine. Tiling, I'm not sure if tiling really made any difference there, apart from some of them have just gone really weird. But we can just go through them. Check size to content. Check size to content partly atomic. So I'm size to content. Under what section would that be? Size to content. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that means that it is already going to be 22 by 22. Yeah, okay, that solves things. That makes things a bit quicker. Unfortunately, we still yes, we can apply that en masse, but then again, we can also yes, yeah, I see. Okay, that makes it a little better. So we've got all our pieces now of the right size. Thanks for that. But I don't think having all of these pre-added is going to work. I'll just arrange these neatly in a approximate location. They may not be completely accurate with regards to how they are there, but we'll get our mini-map up. But as I say, I don't want to have to have handcrafted every island, because I want to at least have the option of creating them automatically. So creating them more dynamically. We jump back into our game. Minimap. We still can't drop the widget down. We must need to create some UI element within this actual space. Or otherwise, or maybe we can't just drop them down, maybe we have to render them in the code. Yeah, it was a bit of a jigsaw. Luckily that's probably one of the easiest jigsaws I've had to do. It works quite well. It's quite easy to do them. It will be quite easy to piece together all 30 odd islands. Create widget had to be bought. Yes. So thanks, partly atomic. So I can't just drop it in. I have to do it within the code. We'll do it in part of the level blueprint. So we can do create widget, and we want our minimap widget. Owning player will be the normal person, but that's obviously going to be more applicable a bit later on. And then add to viewport. That's the one. Part of that. Oh, error. Makes sense. And back in the game. Okay, so right up in our corner, in the corner there, we can see our minimap. Maybe a bit smaller than we expected, but it's there. In its size, it seems to have this awkward cross in the middle of it, but not really sure where that comes from. Maybe I just haven't quite aligned everything correctly. Maybe they overlap a little bit too much, or not enough, as the case may be. But they are very small. And they don't get shown by default either, which must be another. Do we have the construct event in this case? No. Connect the dots, yeah. Yes, the blueprint's very much like connect dot to dot, and I did miss that one. So yeah, while that works, and we do get our mini-map, we do seem to lose it up in the corner a bit. So we need to make it bigger, or we need to make the rest of it smaller. Now, as it stands, our sector map, as I say, that's an actor, and we know that the little people that we were walking around with in the first video, and a little bit on the second, they need to be actors to be able to move around, to do the things that they do. Even though within this game the player doesn't have much direct control over them, they still need to be actors to do what they do. Whereas other components perhaps don't need to be actors. I don't know at this point really what the advantage or disadvantage would be in having the minimap as a widget, or as I already have here, got it. At least having it as a blueprint actor in this case has actually made it so that its relative size to the sector view it kind of matches up better, similar to how the actual game does if we hadn't have dropped out of it or lost the particular level again. Whereas I think if we make part of it a UI widget, then we could scale it to fit the size that we want. I guess we could easily do that. So we can shrink that down now to, I don't know, we just shrink it down to whatever it needs to be to fit all of the pieces in. It says 31 by 31. I'm not really sure what that represents. Difficult to zoom in, it keeps throwing us all over the place. There we go. So we can have scale here. Give it a scale of 2 on each side. Save that. Replay it. God knows where it's gone. Yes, so partly Atomic says the naming is a little confusing, but the distinction is that an actor, anything with a location, and a pawn, anything controlled by either a or a player. So, yes, our little people have a location and they move around. So it does make a lot of sense for them to be actors. They're not controllable directly by the player, although the player can effectively spawn or despawn them by creating an army or removing an army, or even later on putting down the tower defense people, but they can't literally control them. Yeah, I didn't notice that the data logic class game mode would be derived from actor, but I haven't quite got to the game mode part of it yet. But I think the big question is there, within the game that we're trying to create, would it work better if everything was an actor, even though the user, or even though it doesn't move in the same sense, though certain things obviously within the sector component do move, or whether they should be widgets. I think perhaps there should be a level of consistency between the components we use, and at least based on what we've got so far, using actors works. We're going to have to code our minimap actor to understand where to put each piece, but that does somewhat base itself on what the map is. I think that's going to be the case anyway, because we can't, if we go back to our original blueprint of our map, now we created our 2x2, put that back, we created our 2x2, and that's, if we look at just simply so partly Atomic suggests that the best approach is using actors for everything as a base representation, and widgets as an alternative representation, such as internal view of player stats or minimap. Well, that was kind of the train of thought here with the minimap widget, but because of the way it renders that, even when because for some reason now we've kind of lost it completely, I don't know where it is, despite the fact it should be attached to the viewport exactly how it was before. So the scaling change is the only change we made between it being there and not being there. It seems to have some weird effect. So actually getting that that widget to behave and be consistent with the slate that we have, and then the menu that we have, I'm not sure if that's going to be easier or not. I think the mini map during the gameplay has some interaction, like the border or the selection box around the one you want. I think there's an element of some of the icons when you actually have an army down. For some reason the mouse isn't working quite so well in this at the moment. I think with DOSBox sometimes it does behave a bit awkward. But yeah, so there's, when you've got an army that's going to move, it does flash. But obviously those kind of things are possible within the widget, within a minimap widget, and maybe they'll be easier or more difficult than doing it within an actor. Oops, press escape with the wrong thing shown. But the actor's gonna work just as well, I think, at this point. There is some cases where we are showing pure stats, or potentially, like this control here, may work better as a widget because we can organize things in a way that actually allows user control. Perhaps the menu in game would actually work well as a widget as well. So it's going to be a bit awkward to know at this point which is better. Because it doesn't feel right to render the sector, this part of it, as a widget, but it does seem like there's some awkwardness with rendering this slate as a widget and the minimap as a this minimap as a widget and the slate as an image. I don't know where this random circles come from either. Or maybe that's just where oh, it must be all those stuff that it's adding. I remember now. Adds a whole bunch of stuff for some reason. That's one at the side. A default pawn. Some of it's obviously not shown. Some of it is. And that ball must be one of these things that is randomly dumped into my map. But we'll deal with that another time. So I guess within the widget we can create an image, cast it to an image. But can we add an image? What do they call them? Palette. We can get a brush from an image. I'd assume there'd be a way to dynamically create widget components. I mean, we could have, as we currently have, the maximum amount of items. Zoom to fit. That's not good. The zoom to fit doesn't work very well because it definitely does fit. I guess realistically, just seeing if that makes any difference to whether this shows up or not. Yeah, it still shows up okay. So when I changed the scale, it did seem to go wrong. But when if I change the scale of the main root item to 2, which should just simply make the gadget bigger on screen, and then we play, it seems that the gadget disappears somewhere. Sorry, the widget disappears. So I don't really understand that. We'll definitely have to keep that to 1. We probably could get the pieces to fill this space, but another issue that we're going to have is that we'll either have to have empty images, or we'll have to move things around. So to kind of demonstrate what I'm trying to say, if we add a new panel, that's really what we want. I suppose it matters. If we were to have the island that we keep jumping into, this simple 2x2, we can see that that's kind of slightly on the right, so that must be those 2 spaces. So we can change these images. I don't know why it's showing the don't know why it's trying to get us to save that. I just want to change the save everything. Just want to change the icon, the image for this, and it keeps telling me that it wants to save a new texture rendered target cube. For the time being, I'll just save it, unless I guess I'm clicking something by accident there. Okay, so I don't know which ones they are now. They are 15 and 16. So let's just say we change, keep doing that. That to 15. Put them there. And that one to 16. Maybe this is actually going to work. 16. Nope. I don't know. Didn't do that before. When we click down, it seems to now automatically select whatever the mouse happens to be over at the time, unless we unselect it. Unless. Okay, so does that work? Yeah. So we can use a little eye. Oh, too many. Hide the ones we don't want. That one we do. Okay, so nice. Okay, that actually works. So wherever I've positioned them, it seems to be that they're all relevant relative to that location. So perhaps I can create with my 16 images that I have. I keep saying 16. I think it's 16, but with my 16 images, yeah, 4x4. And with my 16 images I've got, because they already overlap, as is evident by these 2 little green boxes, or these 2 green lines in between, because they already overlap, replacing the images in them with other ones that look different and join in different places seems to work just fine. So we can have our predefined 16 spaces and simply change the image to whatever we want for the particular map or island that we're showing, and the individual parts of that the individual sectors of that map. So I think if we run that now, we should see, yeah, a bit awkward, because obviously the hide and display has actually only been affected within the editor. Must be an option. Is there an option to make it invisible? Yeah, hides and shows it within the editor, but it doesn't hide and show it within the game. Is enabled visible? There we go. I think we can multi-select to get that done. Select them all. Deselect 22 and deselect 12. set the visibility to hidden, and save. Save, compile, jump over here and play. And now we can see our minimap, while still small and still up in the left hand corner, is actually showing what we want, but there is still that awkward line. So I don't know why the awkward line is not kind of shown here, but when it actually renders it, it is. There must be a... The zoom is pretty annoying. Yeah, so I could, as suggested by Partly Atomic, I could create each of the different maps in separate grid panels and just show and hide the appropriate grid panel. But as I say, I'm trying to avoid predefining all of the levels. It would be very easy to do that, and it would be almost as easy to switch between them once it's already been done. The problem is that limits me to just those levels. I would like a system in which I could create my own levels or have random levels or all those kind of things, and I don't really want to limit myself. So while that may mean that the process of getting this mini-map working is going to be a bit more long-winded, it should be more beneficial moving forwards. I think because I can change the visibility of each individual part, and I can change the image of each individual part, aside from the size and aside from the little bit of black line that we see, it's mostly going to be possible. We need to somehow make this bigger. Now, at the moment, each of our parts are all anchored. There we go. They're just anchored to, I guess, nothing in this case. But they do overlap, so if I anchor them, the likeliness is they're just going to go all over the place. So if I do that one, or that one. Yeah, the anchors don't seem to make any difference in this context, which is not surprising because I've got all of them selected. But I'm not sure if anchoring them is going to work. I mean, they're in effectively the right place. I just need to make it bigger. Okay, don't do that, whatever I did. I think that was a combination of changing the anchor and resizing the container. I don't know which one of these I changed size of. I think because they're tied together, it's actually both of them. And the offset of this, the position of this is just the same regardless. Let's just anchor them into the top right hand corner. I'll probably move around all weirdly again. Yeah, okay, so that at least works a little better. They're not moving all over the place now. Quite in the top right corner. So yeah, I think as you say, so partly Thomas says that the anchor is really about defining how they behave on different screen sizes. So yeah, that looks about right. If the screen resolution got bigger and I anchor them in a particular way, they may change based on that. Obviously in this case, for this widget, we actually just want them always to be in the top right. Now, at the moment, we have just one widget on our screen, and that's why the minimap is up in the right corner. If we're going to continue with this kind of process, then it would make sense that the what's it called, island name and the age you're in, and then the controls down the bottom, and the shields and the speed controls, all of that would be part of a single widget that holds sub-widgets which represent those things. Exactly how we can tie up all of that to our menu and the shields and all that's a bit unknown, but we know that we can go back into our content, and I think we will create a new UI folder and create a new widget blueprint, and we'll call this white panel. Well, obviously we can't drop that in, but what we can do is open it up, stop it, go back into our level, and now instead of creating our minimap, we'll create our white panel, and the white panel will be a third of the screen, whatever that happens to need to be. We'll go for about 300. Which I think I don't know why that doesn't work. We can't undo changes to this. It seems to snap to there, so we'll let it snap to there, and we'll actually say that it will have a canvas panel. I think that's what we would want. No, I think maybe we'll go for horizontal box, anchor that to the whole page. I find it really odd that when you anchor something, it doesn't actually reset the offset, so it is anchored, but all the offsets are still as they were, so it's exactly where you thought it was. Anyway, so anchor that horizontal box to the full page, and within that horizontal box we will put a vertical box. So we're kind of building up our UI, and we're basically going to focus on the space for our minimap, the space for our shields and speed, the space for the island name and age, and the space for our menu. So we've got our vertical box, and that's obviously on the left hand side, that's where we want it, and inside the vertical box we want our minimap, our shields. So to achieve that, again, our minimap is on the left and our shields and speed controls on the right. So the first component of our vertical box needs to in itself be a vertical box, and the first and second item of the vertical box will be our minimap and our shields, and then the next item of our vertical box will be another horizontal box, and that will be is an island and sector details. So we've got the island name, which is the same for both both sectors in this case, but the sector details, as I've called it, is actually the age, I suppose, or the tech level of that particular sector. The red team hasn't done anything, and neither have I, so neither of us have gone up at tech level, but if I were to do some research, I'd go up in a tech level and that value would change. So our vertical box can... I put them in the wrong place, didn't I? Should be... No, that's fine. Got there in the end. So that's minimap and speed and players. We'll just call it players. So we've got a minimap and the players, the island and the sector details, and then finally we're going to have a menu, or the kind of main controls. I don't think that that's really a uniform grid. I think they're going to be a bit all over the place, so we're just going to use a canvas panel in our vertical box as our third item. And because our horizontal box is actually full width over our canvas panel, all these bits are probably going to be a bit mismatched, but minimap and players. So we want to add the minimap to the minimap and players section as a child of. So we want to actually go back here. So we want to modify the minimap and players section and island and sector details and canvas panel. Now, because the minimap and players, and perhaps some of the others, but we'll get to them in a moment, because the minimap and players contains multiple things, we could dynamically add to that container, but we know that it's only going to ever contain two things, or two key things. So within that minimap and players, it is a horizontal box in itself, isn't it? So yes, so really we just want I think that makes any difference. Yeah, so I think we'll just put a canvas panel in there. Two canvas panels. This one will be the minimap. So we don't actually care what this one's called. We can't reset its name either. Can we just rename it to that? Yeah, good. So that's the minimap. The canvas panel isn't actually what we want there, because we know that the speed control and the shields always go vertically. So we know the next component we want here is just the vertical box. And again, we'll have one canvas panel for the speed control, and then another vertical box for the players, as we're going to call it, and that one there. So that one could be the enemies or the allies or whatever state they happen to be at the time, and this one is the speed. So we could put the image for the speed within this widget, but if we did that, then this widget would also have to control the image that the speed is using. So it might be better to create a new widget to put in there, much like we're doing with the minimap. We don't want this one widget to have control over everything that is on the right hand pane. We want to break those components down. So the minimap item, we want to make that a variable inside our graph. So the option to do that is actually outside of all of the options for a particular component. In this case, the palette item panel. We've got all of these options, but to make it a variable, it's this text box here, and that is displayed slightly differently. It's now bolded within our widget hierarchy. Yep. But within the graph, we now have it as a variable. So we can get our minimap, and we could add a child, and the child that we want to add is actually a new. So we want to create a widget, and we want to create our minimap, and the return value goes into here. So that is our minimap container needs to contain a minimap widget, and we'll do that on the pre-construct, and the pre-construct hopefully will allow us to see it before we run the game, and obviously when we run the game. Now we've got that in place, we need to go to our level blueprint, and rather than, oh actually sorry, we've already changed it, so we're actually showing the right panel anyway. Just compile that, jump back into the game. So somewhere, stop that. We'll remove the minimap actor that we created earlier. That will try and avoid some confusion. Where's the remove? Oh, right one isn't one, just delete it. And save that. Has that made any difference? Nope. White panel, save that. Go into the designer. So maybe our minimap is too small to see. Maybe it's there, but it's just not showing up. I don't think that that's the case, because the container should all be sized based on something that's in it, and our minimap actually has a size. Not that one. Not that one. Our minimap actually has a size. Don't need the sectors anymore, or the sector blueprint. but it's not showing up. So what we can do is, in our graph of our minimap, we will put in some text, print, we'll just leave it as hello, and then when we run it, we don't see hello. So something's not quite right, something's not quite being created. So we can go into our canvas, and we have our canvas panel on our horizontal, and everything that comes under the vertical box here is actually the right hand panel. Perhaps we've added too much hierarchy here. So really this is the stuff that represents our panel. A horizontal box, there'd never be anything on the right of the panel. It's always going to be a horizontal box. So can we, and it's all this vertical box is all we need really. Oh, unfortunately that wasn't what we wanted to select. Put that up there. Delete that horizontal box. So the canvas palette has a vertical box which we want to anchor to the right hand side of the screen. Our horizontal box and our minimap, perhaps it's there. Yeah, so we can kind of see the components. I'll press the arrow. Kind of see the components kind of laid out. This canvas panel, we want it to fill. The minimap we want to fill, and the text in the middle we don't. And let's see if that makes any difference at all. When we run, nope, still no minimap. We should actually be seeing the minimap because we put it in the pre-construct, which should mean that this is done. Oh, that's why. Dot to dot went wrong. Forgot to connect up the creation. We were just simply adding a child. The return value from this, because this wasn't executed, would have been null or nothing, and therefore we wouldn't have added any children and everything would have been just as it was. So hopefully now we've tied it up right. Yes, excellent. That actually did more. Our minimap seems to be a little bit bigger than our space for our minimap object. Trying to get this UI stuff to resize things correctly, it kind of sounds like it's going to be a bit of a pain. That's our entire canvas space highlighted in green. Our vertical box is there. So our vertical box should be anchored. Again, we've got this size offset X and offset bottom, so get rid of those. Now our vertical box is correctly taking up the entire left hand side. It's still not expanded it in any way. I guess because of the size. Okay, so we want the size of this. We just take a screenshot of that. Let's give us some idea of approximate size for the so in the original game it's probably goes up to about there. So we're talking about 160, 170-ish. Go for 170. And let's see what that looks like. You can see the minimap at the top and the hello world, so we know that the gadget is being created, or the minimap is being created correctly, so we can just drop that now. Stop that. So the vertical box is taking up the size we want, but our horizontal box isn't, because our canvas panel is taking up everything else. So we can go back into paint. Our menu size is probably around 220. So we want this to be no higher than 220. There doesn't seem to be a way to make it 220. Doesn't seem to be a way to. I don't know why our horizontal box here is really widget sizing and lining up is a pain. It is. I think sometimes it can. I've worked with editors that do this kind of horizontal boxes, vertical boxes, grids and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes it can work quite well. It does look like the grid can actually have misaligned children. But anyway, sometimes it does work very well. I think it's somewhat of a matter of understanding what all the controls do. But there is also an element of it just takes quite a while to learn what those things do and how they all fit together. We've obviously got the basic components that we want within our kind of game control gadget, or widget, I keep calling them the gadgets, widget, but the sizing is all off. Width-wise it's fine, but then height-wise it's not. So we could make this one auto, but it's not making this one bigger. Even though there's a widget inside it, and maybe it's got something to do with the fact that it doesn't know how big the minimap is, and maybe actually in the game, I mean the minimap's tiny anyway, so we definitely need to sort that out. But in the game it may not be too much of a problem. So we know that the island and sector details is going to have 2 pieces of text in it. Now the font here is obviously generated from the image files that we have, and I believe there's a way to kind of create a custom font based on images so that we can have the same font, but to be able to get something shown straight away, we can obviously use 2 pieces of text, 2 apparently giant pieces of text. So we'll just name them what we've got for our default level here. Laura seems to be our first map. Don't think I spelled that right, did I? A-L-O-H-A. And then the date is 9500 BC. So we know our text size is way too big, but just for informational purposes, what does it look like in game? Yeah, so our font size within the editor, where we were zoomed in to 5x zoom, was crazy big. Excuse me, but if we zoom back down to 1:1 ratio, it's not that big at all. But the boxes still aren't auto-sizing, and our text doesn't fit in the 170 that we described. Now, size to content, that helped. Minimap, is there a size to content on the canvas? Canvas pane. So where was that? In the horizontal box, there is a, I can't remember where I ticked that button now. Size to content I had it somewhere. There. So our vertical box has a size to content canvas panel slot. Okay, I see. So you kind of, within the slot options, you're saying how it works with the parent. So yeah, so that's a bit better. I mean, obviously it's still overlapping a lot. So maybe if we go back to our map, so we don't, because we don't have these, yeah, 22 pixels is probably because our view is so big, because obviously we're using images that are designed for a game that fits within that resolution scale, which again, if we just use paint to get an idea of how big that is 640 by 400 more or less, whereas we're actually displaying it or rendering it probably at a much higher resolution. Now I remember in the camera controls there was a way to specify like its width, aspect ratio, don't know if that aspect ratio made much of a difference. Yeah, the aspect ratio changes the actor, but it doesn't seem to change the widget either. Let's leave the aspect ratio at 1. Reposition that widget to make it back, or that the actor back to where it was. So I'm not sure whether there's any real control over the resolution of the game. That must be in the game settings. World settings. Yeah, so I think I'll have to do some research on how best to set it up to work for kind of a specific resolution. I know that when we were looking at the mini-map, we're obviously setting the resolution of the canvas pane to be an entire screen, but we obviously don't want to do that anymore. We really want the mini-map to be as big as it is here. So I think, as we've chopped it out before, approximately 135 by 135. So we can resize this to be 135 by 135. It's a bit awkward that you don't actually have any size controls, as far as I can find anywhere. You can resize it with its arrow, but you can't actually type it in anywhere to get it right or to get it accurate. But we can manually get it 135 to 135. And we actually want our minimap parts to fill that space. So is there a scale? Let's try 2 by 2. Yeah, so if we're increasing the scale, we've got, they're obviously going to be all overlapping each other now. It's like jigsawing it back into place. Probably a bit too much there with 5 scale. It's gone. Make it 4. See if 4 fits. More or less. Seem to multi-select the right keyboard shortcut. There we go. It doesn't. Multi-selecting and dragging just seems to move all of them to the same place, so I'll have to do it by hand. I think that's about centre. Centre as it needs to be anyway. So reposition everything back to where it should be. We went about there. So we've still got kind of the mismatch of different parts. But deal with that later. Can't put that in the right place, otherwise we'll cover up all the bits we want. There we go. Compile that and save. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so that's much closer to what we're after. I mean, it's lost some of its clarity, so it hasn't really worked very well. We'll just have to defend our little castle here. If we can, if the mouse responds. Yeah, so it's lost because of the fact that we've actually blown it up. We've lost so much of the quality of it, and again, it does not fit into our control. So yeah, we're gonna have to give it that some thought. I'm not convinced that doing it by a widget is actually really going to be helpful. I think if we would have left it as a blueprint, we'd definitely have made more progress in actually getting it to show stuff by now. We know that based on how we've done it within the gadget, we can minimap widget even. We can position all the components. We'll probably be able to do that in a blueprint as well, or in an actor as it was. Position all the pieces much like we have here, and then show and hide and replace the image with something else whenever, or in the case of the actor, would be replacing the sprite, to actually show the minimap we want. So it seems like using a UI element in this case is actually just making it more difficult. Introduces a whole bunch of new controls in terms of, or new options for those controls that actually just seem to be getting in the way. We've almost got it the right size, but we lose the clarity. Despite the fact that it's in a component here, that's actually where we've added the minimap. The minimap is not there. The minimap is basically wherever it wants to be. That doesn't really make any sense to me. I don't understand why it's done that. But given that we don't actually want to display we don't want to display in this context, we don't want to display any text, but we do need to display text in this lower section. So it might be something that we'll have to overcome anyway. There won't be a way that we can display oh no, I've just lost. So close. There won't be a way that we can do the numbers and the text parts within an actor, or at least I haven't seen one yet. So yeah, so I'm probably going to have to do some research, find out what maybe the better way is, or if we are approaching it from the right direction, how to get it to look right, scale properly, and just fit within the context of what we're actually aiming for, fit within its container. Maybe that would be a bonus as well. But yeah, so as is usually the case, didn't make as much progress as I'd hoped. I thought maybe we'd be able to actually get the mini-map to not only render, but also render the right map, and maybe even more than that if things went well, but things didn't progress as fast as I'd have liked. and we're left with two potential ways of doing our minimap. No clear indication of which way is the best way. And we'll take that with us to the next episode. Should be sometime tomorrow, early evening kind of time. Probably a little bit earlier than today. But between now and then, I'll try and figure out what the right approach is, and then we'll be able to make more progress tomorrow. So thanks again for Partly Atomic for the little bits of help, and hope you watch next time. Good night for now.